we're in the midst of a huge transformation where peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Christopher Shryock. He is the Senior Vice President and Chief People Officer at Sam's Club. Christopher, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Okay, let me take a step at it. First of all, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it, Christina. So, as you said, my name is Christopher Shryock, he, him, his, and I work in the people team for Sam's Club as the Chief People Officer. Really responsible for all aspects of HR for our 100,000 or so associates that we have across the U.S. and Puerto Rico. Maybe for some of the folks that aren't as familiar with Sam's Club, it's actually a division of Walmart. We're about 74 billion in revenue, 600 locations. And we think for the people that are paying to shop with us, we have a lot of really great quality products at really good value. So I've been at Sam's for 18 months. Previously, I spent 14 years in fast moving consumer goods with PepsiCo, kind of all places all over the world with them. Was in the travel industry before that, and even a little bit of consulting prior to that. I think your question was when I grew up, what did I want to be? When I was a kid, all I wanted to be was a pitcher for the Detroit Tigers. So I have veered pretty far off that path from my initial aspiration.
I love that answer. I always think it's interesting to go back and think about how did I answer that question? I would love to ask, as your role as Chief People Officer and kind of leader of the team of a lot of different kind of groups and employees at Sam's Club, what are qualitative and quantitative ways you think about kind of measuring that company culture at Sam's Club?
Yeah, so if I think about maybe the quantitative first, there's a few different ways I would look at it. One, and what I kind of view as the ultimate measure, is this thing called employee net promoter score, which basically is just asking associates, how likely are you to recommend this company to a good friend, family member, et cetera? So that's one key way. I think the second piece is a lot of companies would use measures like satisfaction, commitment, et cetera, to understand a bit of not only the culture, but really how engaged people are. And if I really think about kind of culture at its essence, for me, it's kind of this combination of three things of how much energy do your associates have? How much optimism do they have kind of in the future of the company or the organization? And are they proud to work for the company that they're a part of? So kind of that NPS, satisfaction, commitment, energy, optimism, pride. Like this is kind of quantitative ways we look at kind of culture and engagement at Sam's and in other organizations. If I think about it qualitatively, though, which is probably even a little bit more interesting, I'm sure there's some very technical definition of culture I've forgotten from my graduate school days. But to be honest, the way I think about culture is really, it is just who you hire, who you fire, and who you promote. And kind of that's it. That's what the things are that people see. And I think, especially in the role that I'm in now, I mean, culture it's something you can see when you walk into an office, a club, or a store. So if I think about Sam's, I mean, our intent is creating a member-obsessed culture. And you can see that if you're in a club and an associate is walking a member to an item. You can see that in online forums where members might be talking about something that an associate has done that's kind of above and beyond. And you can see that when you're walking through a club and the associates, not the manager, are talking to you about their work, what they've done, and what they're proud of. So I think you need a bit of both. You need some quantitative, but I think that qualitative piece is, it is certainly and honestly, probably even a lot more important.
Yeah, you can definitely see energy, optimism, really manifest in person as well. And I think kind of how people talk about their work environment too, to their family, friends, and peers as well, is also kind of a key cornerstone to that company culture as well. And we know that, a company is comprised of a lot of different employees, from managers to leaders to new hires as well. What do you think your kind of unique role to set the tone for company culture is as CPO?
I mean, I don't know if it's unique, but I do think that there's there's probably a few things that CPOs specifically and kind of human resources or a people function more generally need to do. I think the first piece is around behavior. So kind of the ability to articulate, these are patterns of behavior that we expect. That can be company values, that can be leadership behaviors, whatever the case may be, but like articulating, here's what we expect of people in behavior. That's number one. Number two is really about, I think about it like systems, right? So this is kind of processes and tools that work to reinforce that culture that you want to see. So this can be culture or engagement surveys. This can be 360s. This can even be in terms of performance management, in terms of assessing folks, not only on what they've done, but equally on how they've done it. Have they exhibited kind of those behaviors and things that you want to see? So that systems piece is, I think, really important. Thirdly, I think that kind of my role and the role of the function is to kind of shine a light on symbols that are representative of kind of these values or behaviors that we espouse to believe. So if you think about it in terms of reward and recognition and showing what you value. So, my company before Sam's, we were really trying to be far more entrepreneurial. So we had this whole piece around the next big idea where anyone in the organization could work cross-functionally and bring about ideas that they wanted to see enacted and make that presentation almost like a game show to the leadership of the company. Or if I think about Sam's, we have an award that we give out kind of once a year called a Blue Coat, which is fundamentally for the individuals that are living our values, that are delivering consistently over time, kind of like the best of the best that we've got. And that to me is a really important symbol of, this is what we want the company to be like. This is really what we value. And then that last piece is, for me, is kind of storytelling. So how leaders, and honestly, just how HR even tells the story of the culture through actions, through meetings, simple things like emails, et cetera. But that's how I see my role. And honestly, that's kind of what I expect of the folks on my team, of that, behaviors, systems, symbols, storytelling. Like that's the way I think about it. And I think if you do those things well, like magic kind of starts to happen in terms of really, as you worded it in the original question, Christina, kind of setting that tone for the right company culture.
Absolutely. There's a flywheel effect of effective communication around goals and values. If we say we kind of value the entrepreneurial mindset, are we telling stories? Are we rewarding that behavior? Are we setting verbal and nonverbal cues around that as well? And are we modeling that behavior as leaders? And I think these are all questions that we continue to ask, but kind of ask in a different way over the past few years as we are kind of thinking about the pandemic and all of the changes that we have been seeing too. As we're thinking about employee engagement and what that looks like in practice, what does a holistic strategy look like for employee engagement at SAMS?
So, I talked a little bit earlier, I guess, about kind of how we think about assessing engagement itself, but I kind of think about that strategy, I guess, as you put it, of there's kind of two inputs and kind of a couple of very concrete outcomes that I think are important. So the first input is it's having a really robust engagement survey process. I think we've got this at Sam's, we've got this at Walmart, we've got this in a lot of companies, and that is, it's really being clear on what engagement is. It's being clear that the results of an engagement survey, they're for managers. It's not for some group of executives in corporate to kind of look at and go, are we up or down? But it is for managers to drive actions. I think that process, it needs to be action oriented. So I think if you're, what I'd always say to my team is, what is a club manager in Utah going to do with this? So I want to be clear on what engagement is, that it's for that club manager, and that I'm helping them to understand what are those areas to focus on, which may not be the items that were just lowest on the survey. There may be things that are actually pretty high, but is actually a critical driver of engagement. You're better off taking from good to great than you are something at the bottom of the survey going from a huge opportunity to average. So being clear on where to focus, and then helping them to get some sample recommended action. So, for example, let's say if you're a manager and you've got, I don't know, an opportunity for associates to believe that their work is making a difference or something like that. I think you've got one, help that manager understand what are the questions for them to ask. Do my team's goals align with that mission or the overall strategy? Do I even know what that mission or strategy is? and then give them some actions for the team. So working with that team of how does our work ladder up? Are they recognizing small things that have that ripple effect, et cetera? So I think that's like the key piece of like having that robust survey process and doing something with it. The second thing that I think is quite important is evolving that robust survey process into kind of this always on listening process. And this is something we're working to build, right? So for me, this is about not only having and collecting that data from engagement surveys, but from other associate listening forums. So in Sam's, I spend a lot of my time listening very, very earnestly to what associates have to say in kind of these formal and informal settings, looking at other survey data we have, looking at external sources. So if you really want to get a sense of how you're doing as a company, spend some time on Glassdoor, spend some time on Reddit, and you're going to get a really good sense of what people are actually saying. But pulling all of those things together of other surveys, listening forums, engagement surveys, and these external venues, that's really the way that you get kind of a continual sense of the pulse of an organization. So it's that having that process and kind of this always on active listening. And then if I think about outcomes, so to me, I think if you're really driving engagement and you're really investing in associates, for us, we see our members, they're happier. Member satisfaction increases, productivity increases, standards inside of our clubs increase, turnover goes down. And this is kind of where you see that magic happen. And for me, engagement really is the key for all of these good things that we want to see happen. And it's why we spend so much time on it here, Christina.
Absolutely. When people feel heard, understood, and seen, they feel engaged in the work they're doing. They feel like their goals are clearly communicated. I think it was Brene Brown who said clear is kind as well. So what does it really mean? What does success look like? And really parsing out the data and all of the ongoing listening kind of tools and avenues of what this means, especially for managers too. We've all heard the terms people don't leave bad managers, or people don't leave bad companies, they leave bad managers. So I think that definitely makes sense.
No, it's right. And I think it's one of those in a lot of organizations, you'll start with like, well, what's going to the CEO, then what's going to the leadership committee, then what's going to directors, then what's going to managers. And kind of my belief and what we really try to do here is this is only for the managers. They're in the soup every day. So how are we giving them not only actionable insights, but actionable tools to help them do their jobs? Because I think, the worst thing you can do in terms of engagement is just make it some HR process and HR report. It will be looked at once a year and nothing will happen, versus if you can make that relevant and resonant and actionable for a manager, that's really where you want to be spending the time.
Absolutely. And it manifests in other parts of the business. It manifests in the specific department and on the team. And we talked about how it's related to turnover and employee happiness and kind of how we're speaking about the organization too. And there's been a lot of conversations around kind of leaders making an impact, especially amidst the Great Reset or the Great Resignation, the Great Reimagination, whatever you want to call it there, and a lot around kind of retention. What would you say your retention strategy is, whether it's key pillars or if you've tested anything new recently? I think this definitely relates to kind of that employee engagement.
Yeah, I think the answer is it depends a little bit. So I kind of, many years ago, I used to run an advanced analytics center of expertise, which basically was just code for I hired a bunch of people a lot smarter than me, and we did math problems about our people in our organization. And one of the things that we were always looking at was turnover. And one of the things that I think was true then that I also think is true now is you've really got to kind of understand like what's the cohort and what's the problem. So for me, there's a big difference between frontline, between executives, between other professionals. So if I think about frontline and why people typically leave, in my experience, they tend to be perfect economists. If someone is going to pay them $1 more, they are going to leave and take that $1 more. That doesn't mean that things like manager quality, like engagement and the culture don't matter. They do. But if I've got to kind of rank order that, you start with comp and then you go to manager quality engagement. Versus if you think about more professional populations, yes, there's an element of comp, but it's more about, are you paying people what you said you were going to pay them? And then it's really about signals. So what performance ratings you're giving them, how long they're staying in a role, to your point, who they work for, certain functions, certain locations are more at risk, et cetera. But the first piece is really just understanding the problem and why. I think the second piece is then, okay, well, now we need to do something about it. So if I think about Sam's Club specifically, since early October, we've been actually fully staffed at Sam's Club. And I think some of the ways that we've been able to do that is because we've been continually investing in associates and really focusing a lot on retention. So of course, we're constantly looking at investments, including compensation. But I think more importantly, we've put a lot of effort and energy in terms of investing in managers, investing in the development of associates in the club, if that is free college tuition, et cetera, and making sure those environments are kind of as engaging as possible. And then I think the last thing that, it's not really about the front line, and it's almost generic to the point of not being useful, but I feel like managers getting back to the basics and just knowing their people. So who are they? What do they aspire to? What engages with them? Investing in their development, like doing these basic things, in my experience, there really isn't much of a replacement for kind of knowing who your people are, what they want to do, and how you can help. And no HR process is going to solve that. If you're a manager, you're having those conversations, or you're not, which I suspect is a pretty strong reason to go back to your original comment, Christina, of, hey, people don't always leave companies. A lot of times they leave managers, but that's really kind of how we think about it. Know the problem, do something about it. And, if you're a manager, get back to the basics.
Yeah, and it's really understanding the data, as you were talking about, asking those curiosity-based questions as a manager, knowing that the questions you are asking, the answers are going to be different from employees at different parts of their career and different geographies, and really actively listening and making it actionable, and really kind of manifesting how you are supporting folks as well. And everybody's bringing in different lived experiences to SAMS as well. I think you mentioned over 100,000 associates. I'd love to ask, how can organizations really identify those quote unquote hidden dangers? One of them we already mentioned, those toxic managers, or like department misaligned values or goals, and proactively find them by empowering employees to speak up, knowing that day one is very different from year 5, and not everyone's going to feel comfortable coming to the CPO.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back a little bit to my overly simplified definition of culture. Who you hire, who you fire, and who you promote. This is a bit of, okay, not literally who you fire, but sometimes who you fire, actually. So I guess I think about this one in terms of, you've really got to start with being clear on what you expect from people in terms of how they behave. And one of the things that I think is deeply embedded in the fabric, in the DNA of the company, certainly at Sam's and even Walmart at large, is we've kind of got these 4 core values, and everybody's got to live by these, right? So we talk about, number 1, service to the customer, which is about listening to understand, supporting those people in the front line, and being innovative. We talk about, number 2, having respect for the individual, which is, similarly, listening to understand, not listening to respond, being humble, being honest, embracing differences. We talk about, thirdly, striving for excellence. So like setting that high bar, taking ownership. And then 4th, and I would say kind of, I guess most importantly, although maybe it's the baseline in Maslow's hierarchy here, but it really is about acting with integrity. So honesty, fairness, openness, transparency, these types of things. So we're really clear with people of, this is what we expect everybody to live by. The second thing is, to your point, not everybody is going to send me an email, although that happens a lot more than people may think. Multiple times, if not a day, a week, I've got stuff sitting in my inbox that, is actually really helpful for me in terms of understanding what's going on. But it is giving people those forums to flag behaviors that in our case doesn't align with those behaviors. So this can be talking to their manager, it can be talking to HR, it can be sending me an email. It could be, you have a speak up line or inbox to raise complaints, even anonymously. You've got to have multiple outlets for people to be able to do that. And I think the other piece for me, for us as a leadership team, and in terms of what I expect of my own organization, there is a bit of this back to basics elements of just look at the data. So we've got 600 clubs. Look at the engagement data, look at the turnover data, look at the business performance. And I don't know much, but I know this: if all 3 of those things are low, you absolutely have a problem.
Right.
And very likely that's where you've got kind of some real hidden danger. So you don't need a bunch of advanced statistics to know like engagement, turnover, business performance. Those three things are bad. Something is not going well, and you can start to root it out that way as well. So be really clear, give people forums, and look for obvious signals. And I think for organizations that do those things well, you can really root out a lot of these hidden dangers, as you called it earlier, Christina.
Absolutely. It's in the data. You offer these avenues. We've talked about programs, values, really actions, and how you can set up your environment to be psychologically safe, really building that trust as well on an individual level in terms of kind of that results and that manifestation of the employee feedback management. How do you see this kind of culture, played throughout in a tangible way at Sam's Club?
In terms of kind of employee feedback and
Yeah.
management listening. Yeah. I think that for me in my role, I think that for the roles that the folks that are on my team have, that we have as a leadership team in Sam's, if there is something that is more important than listening to associates and listening to members, I would add, I've been here for 18 months. I haven't figured out what it is yet. I think that is the number one thing we can do. I think sometimes we do that formally with things like engagement surveys. But a lot of times that is simply done by spending time with associates. So, I mean, not only myself, but a lot of leaders really spend time in listening sessions on the floor in a club, in a supply chain site, et cetera. And I think that kind of when we do that, there's a lot of good that starts to come from that. So I think about a few examples of, maybe if I use kind of a formal survey piece. So if I talk about kind of our engagement survey, one of the things that we observed as a team was there were a lot of kind of common items around manager quality, around employees articulating how their ideas count, someone supporting their growth and development, kind of getting direct feedback from a manager. Like all of these things had to do with manager quality. And that was a really important signal of, okay, we've got some great managers, we've got some average managers, and we've got some pretty bad managers. And the missing link was we hadn't really defined what it meant to be a good manager. And if we weren't looking for that in the survey, we wouldn't have known it, but it gave us the ability to go out and really define, well, what do we mean by manager quality? Which for us is about how you identify, how you manage, how you develop, and how you reward associates. And we're able to kind of bring this to life in a program. Some of it instructor-led, a bit for depth, but most of it really just in the flow of work for an associate. So think about, you're a team lead, you're a club manager, you're a site leader, and we're giving you this content on your handheld in the way that you do all of your other work in terms of practice, micro-learning, and even just really simple videos that give you real-time reminders. Because I think what we wanted to have for manager quality when we saw that in the data was, man, this should be an open book test for people. If people find themselves in a circumstance, they should be able to quickly call up, like, what is it that I need to do here? And what does the company expect? So manager quality for me is a really good example of kind of where we've seen this from a data lens and perspective. I think maybe the second example I would give is, over the first 18 months that I've been in this role, okay, I've lost track, I guess, a little bit of kind of how many different clubs and sites I've been to, but it's, I don't know, probably 50, 60 different clubs and supply chain sites. And kind of a key reason I wanted to do that is really understanding what is the average associate's experience, partly with the people organization, but with the people processes. And it's one of the great things I like about Sam's is if you ask that question, you're going to get a very honest reply and response. And it was a little bit, almost a little too much maybe in the early days, but it gave myself and the team the ability to really kind of define what the issues were that we have in terms of, people talked about, it took too long for us to hire. There were all kinds of lagging issues just going unresolved in clubs that we weren't getting to. And it kind of told me that I've got a lot of folks doing the wrong work in the right places, and I've got people doing the right work, but it's the wrong people that are actually doing that. So it kind of gave us the ability to say, we need to hire people not in weeks, but in 24 hours. We need to have one place that someone can go and go, my paycheck was wrong, and not make them figure out, do I call someone in HR? Do I email a shared service center? Do I ask my manager? No, you go to one person. And it gave me the ability to think about, how do I want to reallocate a lot of the resources that I have within my own team? So again, I kind of come back to this quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative survey can be really helpful. It's why manager quality exists. Qualitative of just watching associates work through HR processes. If there are HR practitioners out there that have not done that in a while, I commend highly that you do that. You will learn a lot about your function, about your processes and pain points that associates really have, so that you can go do something about it.
Yeah, I love a good listening tour and really visiting sites and really having your ear to the ground on what's happening and getting that feedback, and also using that with the aggregate data as well. And I think that, you can't action on everything tomorrow, but you can make these long-standing sustainable changes to hiring as well.
And that's the key piece. I mean, look, and to me, that's one of the things I've learned about retail in general, and it applies to a people or an HR function as well. Of there is there is no day when you've got it all done and you've got it all right. There's days that are better, there's days that are worse, but kind of the whole point is like, you get up the next day and you work to make two things better. And then you get up the next day and you work to make two more things better, and on and on and on. And it really is kind of this woman, Kath McClay, who's our CEO, likes to say, it really is kind of this 1,000 little things. And I don't actually think HR is any different than that. It is just solve one problem for an associate, go back and solve another one.
Absolutely. The work is always going to be there, and folks are going to have feedback as well, and start worrying when people are not giving you that feedback or the engagement is low, like you were talking about as well. Are there any other examples of kind of that innovation in your people strategy or in the space at Sam's Club over the past 2 years that you want to share with folks who are listening?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the manager quality one is probably a pretty good one, as is some of these 24-hour hiring, et cetera. Maybe the one other place I would say is, it's been pretty informative of kind of running these listening sessions, especially with different cohorts of employees, with different associate resource groups, et cetera. So even as we think about kind of what is a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy for SAMS, again, to go back to this same kind of framing of, there's a lot of quantitative things we could look at, and SAMS is no different than any other company. I'm not aware of any large multinational that has cracked the code on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Maybe there's one out there I don't know of. But for us, we could see in the data what some of the issues and some of the challenges were. But I think when you really start talking to these different cohorts, you put context behind the quantitative. So it's really easy to know, okay, my broken rungs are here. I need better dashboards. I need better talent sources. But the things you would totally miss is, associates would tell me, one of the challenges is I don't know that I'm getting kind of the right quality feedback. And I'm not even sure I know how to receive that feedback to do something else differently, which I wasn't expecting to hear. People would talk a lot about this element of, I feel like I have a mentor, but I don't always feel like I have a sponsor. Like, how is it that happens? Which is not just give everybody a sponsor, but it's do your job really well so that you kind of create that pull. We talked a lot about kind of broad accountability for how you drive this. So again, that the way we've thought about our DE&I agenda, this thing we call SAM7, of kind of these discrete 7 work streams we have, a lot of that was based on data, but a lot of that was also just based on, talk to me. What do you need? What's not working today? And what is it we as an organization can do better and differently to ultimately have different outcomes as a company?
Having that common language, having a common framework and goals around diversity, equity, and inclusion that is data informed, driven by insights that folks have given you feedback on is really important. You mentioned accountability, and I kind of want to drive in on that point a little bit too, because I think we always have questions around, there are folks that are more invested than others in terms of resourcing. How do you kind of hold leaders accountable across the organization to practice equity-driven leadership once you give them that kind of framework and what great looks like?
Yeah, I think we're working on that one a lot. I guess what I would say there, to use kind of your framing of, I think you described it as kind of equity-driven leadership. This is going to be an oversimplification, but I go back to, and I don't know if you've seen, Christina, or I'm sure some of the folks maybe listening have, there's the cartoon that had kind of made its way around LinkedIn that was articulating the difference between equality and equity and justice. And you talk about kind of equality of like, people are trying to look over the fence to see the game and everybody has the same size box, even though one person's taller, shorter, et cetera. Right. It's equal, but it doesn't really help anybody. Equity kind of being the thing that, everyone really gets the support that they need and you're acknowledging the differences. And then you kind of come to this component of justice, which is actually about addressing the cause of that inequity. I would love to say that, our organization or every other organization is like only looking at justice. I think the reality is we're trying to find that equilibrium somewhere between equity and justice. And that kind of, to me, is the goal. So the first piece is just defining for people, what are we talking about when we say equity-driven leadership? And that's kind of the framing in my head. I think the second piece is, so what do leaders actually need to do? And if I think about leaders in my career, and many of them that work in Sam's Club today, leaders that are equity driven, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, there's some commonalities I see there of they're willing to ask tough questions. They're willing to challenge the status quo, like about things that aren't working. They call out biases when it's not uncomfortable. I got advice really early in my career from someone that said, you need to be willing to lose your job over doing the right thing. And maybe that's a little bit extreme, but I think that's the type of mentality that like more people need to have. And the folks that are really strong in terms of equity driven leadership, that's the type of mentality they tend to exhibit. So like, that's to me kind of what you need leaders to do. How you do that, you've got to have a degree of self-awareness about that, I think. So for me, I am a straight, white, cisgender male. I am not exactly like a vessel for diversity in terms of, the United States or even the world at large. But I like to think I have a degree of self-awareness about that and kind of the privilege and the things that that's been able to afford me. I think you need to have people that understand the past, right? There's this great phrase I really love, which is believe in magic, but understand statistics and history. And I think that's very, very true here of like, you've really got to kind of know and understand, like, where were we? Where are we now? And what do we need to do different? And then it's, you commit to change and you've got a plan. And then it's that plan that leads to the accountability piece of implement that plan, measure the outcomes, and hold people accountable for those DE&I behaviors. So if I think about what we do here, one of our leadership behaviors is all about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So like, are you supporting strategies that identify, retain diverse and inclusive talent? You build high-performing teams, all of these types of things. So I guess if I kind of walk this all the way back of equity-driven leadership to me is, first, you've got to define it. Then you've got to know, secondly, what leaders need to do with it. Thirdly, you got to help people know how to do it. And fourthly, hold people accountable for doing it. But that's kind of the way it works, at least in my head, Christina.
I appreciate that as well, because I think that piece around the internal work, that self-awareness is a big piece of this as well, in order for us to make that sustainable change and really take those actionable steps to make sure that people feel like they are included and that they belong at an organization, and especially a leader's role to really exhibit that and make sure that people feel and experience SAMs in that way as well. Christopher, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience? Maybe a question that I didn't ask you, or 1 or 2 key takeaways you hope they bring with them? I know we talked about a lot today.
No, I mean, look, maybe I would kind of go back a bit to the beginning. I think one, if you think about kind of what a culture is, I think especially in HR, we like to use a lot of HR words, and sometimes I feel like we're just HR people talking to each other. But culture, keep it simple. Who you hire, who you fire, who you promote, and like focusing on doing those small things consistently, kind of day after day, and be clear on what it is you want to stand for, values, behaviors, et cetera. So that's number one. Number two, know the business and know the people. I don't think there is any substitute for this. You can do a job like mine from behind a desk in corporate, but I don't think you can do it very well. So look at the data, but get out there, talk to managers, talk to associates, and you will learn everything you need to learn in terms of what's working, what isn't, and what you need to focus on. And then thirdly is every organization, every CPO, and most people practitioners I know, they feel like there's 1,000 things to do. But the third thing I would maybe leave people with is don't try to do it all. For me, if it takes more than 30 seconds to articulate kind of what you're focusing on in terms of a people agenda, you're doing it wrong. Pick a few things, focus on them, measure them, drive them, and then come back the next year and do it again and make that agenda a little bit better. So culture, know the business and people, and whatever you do, don't try to do it all. You can do anything, but you can't do everything. And just, people should remember that.
Yeah, if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. So making sure that you have that in mind and really, have those intentionality behind your actions is really, really important. Christopher, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thanks very much for having me, Christine. I appreciate it.
Of course, and as a reminder to folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in that empowerment of all employees to speak up, and we know it's a requirement for the organization to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.